Please hang up and try again.
Alright, in this video, this will be a series of videos that talks about KITBASH 3D and using that with MotionVFX's mO2 in Apple Motion. The kit that I will be using here from KITBASH3D.com is going to be the Cyberpunk Mini. I'm doing this tutorial before some of the other mO2 tutorials that I have planned because if you're watching this before Black Friday 2019, KITBASH 3D is going to have a 50% off sale. And if you don't know what KITBASH is, I didn't either up until a few months ago. Check it out. It's pretty cool stuff. You can make some really amazing scenes. Now, I've tried various formats, and the format I find best for mO2 is the FBX plus OBJ, and the only renderer we can pick is native. Now, from time to time, they also have some free kits for you to experiment with, and once you pick your kit and you download it using these settings that I have here, you'll have a zip file. Once you unzip that file, you'll have a textures folder as well as a FBX file, the material file, and the OBJ file. Even though the OBJ file is bigger, I find that it works better for me in mO2 than the smaller FBX file. The FBX file, when I import it, some of the actual pieces to each object do not line up correctly. However, when I import the OBJ file, all of the materials look good, everything's lined up, and there's only a few things we have to change, and it's nothing major. We just have to group some of these pieces of the object together. More on that right here in a second. So I have a default mO2 setup loaded up in Apple Motion. I have the on-screen controls, and what we want to go ahead and do is import that object into mO2. So to do that, let's go to Add, Model, Import Model. Navigate to that folder where you unzip the files, and let's import that OBJ file. This will take a few seconds for it to import everything. It is a big file, and we also have textures coming in. Rename this model whatever you would like, and go ahead and add it to some category or add a new category. And as you can see, I already have it in an imported category inside of mO2. And take note of the size here. We are actually going to import several buildings, and the size right now is set to 3.73, blah, 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 blah. This is actually small in terms of life-size buildings. And that's something I'm going to talk to you about in this video. But for now, let's just leave that alone. But for the materials, let's select Legacy and go ahead and import that. Once you have that OBJ file imported, it should look a little something like this wherever you have it saved in your library, and let's go ahead and add that to mO2. There are several models here as well as the materials and textures and whatnot, so give it some time to load. And once you have done that, you should have something that looks remotely similar to this. Again, using the OBJ and the Legacy when you import the materials. Now there is just a little bit of work that we have to do here to actually get these buildings grouped together. And here's what I mean. If we head to that object and if we open that up, you're going to see that we have a whole bunch of items inside of here. But they are named nicely and we can group these pieces together. For example, Tower C AC. We don't even see that because I believe it's this tower and it's the air condition up here at the top. But for now, I'm not even worried about that. With that Tower C AC selected, if we scroll down to wherever Tower C ends, notice right here, Tower C Metal White, I'm holding Shift and I'm selecting that. That's going to be the last item for Tower C because now we have Tower F beneath that. And with all these Tower C selected, let's right click and let's group it. Scroll on up a little bit and you'll see this group. Let's rename this to Tower C. And here's what's nice about this. This Tower C group that has all of these items inside of it, I can quickly hide it and notice that tower over here disappeared. Now everything else in this list is organized nicely. So Tower F, I'm going to click on that first one. I'm going to scroll down until I see another tower name or building name, for example, Mid-Rise G there. So I'm going to hold Shift and select that last Tower F, right click and group. Scroll on up, let's rename it to Tower F, and maybe you get the idea now. What we're going to do here is we're going to group all of these towers together. And I would just encourage you every time you would group one, just double check and make sure. I have not had any issues with this, but notice as I check and uncheck that Tower F is hiding and showing. So pause the video now. I'm just going to go ahead and group all of these together. All right, so that may have taken a few minutes to get everything grouped together. But with it done like this, we can hide and show individual buildings, and we can just go into those specific pieces and change materials. Yes, we can add our own materials to each piece of the building. But now I want to talk about size. And to do that, I'm going to select all the models because they are still all inside of this one group here. I'm going to switch over to perspective, and I'm just going to drag on out a little bit so we can see all of these models inside of here. Now, these are supposed to be life-size buildings. And you may say, okay, well, how do we know if they are or not? I'm going to close that group down, and I'm going to add a model from mO2. And the model I'm going to add, I'm going to come down here to miscellaneous models, and I'm going to use a army vehicle. Now, once we add that army vehicle to the scene, if this is a life-size army vehicle, then these buildings are like little Tinker Toys or Lego blocks or something. And we want these buildings to be life-size. And you may say, well, we could just scale down the truck. But when you start actually messing around with your camera settings, depth of field and whatnot, the various lights you can add in mO2, using the actual size that the model was intended to be is very beneficial. More on that when we get into the other videos, but let's go ahead and size these buildings correctly. And since we have all of them inside of this group, all of those various buildings we have here, with that entire group selected, we can come down here and start adjusting the scale. And if we slide this all the way up to 10, you may say, oh, okay, we're good now. Well, since we're in perspective, we have the entire group of buildings selected. Let's zoom on out some more. I'm going to close that group up, and I'm just going to take my army vehicle and slide this up here above that group. And I'm going to take that army vehicle and I'm just going to start sliding it around. And I tell you what, I'm going to click on the wrench to speed this up. So we have this army truck, and we can still see this army truck looks way too big. I mean, these are supposed to be big old towers, for crying out loud. But I'm going to use this building right here as a reference. So I have the army truck selected. I'm in perspective. I'm going to frame that army truck. And if this is supposed to be a building, it still looks very small compared to what it actually should be. So what I have found for all of these buildings, if I take the scale and bump it up to around 40, now things are scaled correctly to this army truck, which I have not changed the size of that. It is exactly how it was when I imported it into mO2. And by default, when mO2 imports a model, granted that model was included with mO2, it is importing it based on the size that it should be. So I still have the entire group of buildings selected. I'm going to reframe that so we can see all of them. And now if we try to find our army truck, let's see what happens. I'm going to change my view a little bit, select my army vehicle, and I'm going to use a 3D gizmo. And we can barely see it. You probably can't even see it, but I'm just going to slide that over here, and that's probably pretty close to that building. Let me frame that army truck in. And now check out what we have here. We have this army truck. It now looks lifelike in terms of these buildings behind it. This is going to be beneficial with your camera settings, depth of field, your lights, and all that good stuff. I'll tell you what I'm going to do just to show you the size again. If I go to add another model, and since Christmas is coming up, let's do a Christmas hat. Now, we're not going to see that when it gets imported, but I tell you what, if you would have imported this Christmas hat before we made all these scale changes to the building, that Christmas hat would have been the size of one of those buildings, and we don't want that, right? So let me take note of this army vehicle location. Around 31 and 14 on the Z. So 31 on the X and 14 on the Z. So now I've just moved the Christmas hat closer to where we are. And now notice this Christmas hat. Now, if I were to be quite honest, that Christmas hat looks a little big compared to the army truck itself, but not by much. So imagine if you had some dude, standing right here on this turret, and that hat might be a little bit too big for him. But nonetheless, we have scaled these buildings to where they are the actual size that they should be. So I'm just going to delete that hat. I'm going to frame my entire scene with the buildings again, still in perspective, and I'm just going to zoom on in some. Now, a few more things that we want to do before we actually start moving buildings around and, creating our city and changing materials and all that. Let's check and see how the bottom of these buildings are lined up with the true bottom, I guess you could say, of our scene. And one way to do that is to add a plane. Now, we do not see this plane, but again, had we added this plane before we scaled the city, this plane would have been much bigger than the city itself. But by default, this plane is pretty small. It's a 2x2. I'm guessing that's 2 meters by 2 meters. But what I want to do is I'm going to slide this scale on up, and now we can clearly see that plane, but let's bump that scale up to 100. So now we have all of our buildings inside of here. Let's frame in this little building where the army truck is. Now, one way we can do that quickly probably is to frame in our army truck first, and then I can select parts of this building. And this is beneficial because if we don't know what building it is, I just select a part of that building, and it turns out this is building S. But I'm going to make sure that I have building S selected, and that's that building right there. You can see that it is highlighted. I'm going to frame that in, and I just want to look and rotate in perspective, and I want to see how the bottom of this building looks with that plane. Notice what I'm doing here is I'm kind of going above and below that plane, and I don't see really much of a gap there at all. But I think we're pretty good, and now we are ready to start maybe lighting the scene, adjusting some of the materials and all that good stuff. For example, just real quick before I close out this tutorial, if I have this building selected, let me kind of rotate around a little bit. And we have all of these parts over here. And the part I'm actually interested in is this little lamp post right there. And with that lamp post selected, it's actually selecting various other pieces. If I move my mouse off, and it's actually this galvanized steel. But if we can go into that material real quick, and something we'll be doing in future tutorials as well is maybe taking, here just to see what we're selecting. Let's bump the illuminates up and maybe just add a cyan just so that we can see what we're actually adjusting. And I'll switch on over to the diamond tool. And just by applying that little bit of illuminance, you can see that we are lighting up various parts of this building. But notice also it lit up some parts back here as well. And those parts back there, that's a whole different building. Same thing over here on this building. I'm coming here and change this to a red. Yeah, so it's linking these things to other buildings, and you may wonder, well, how do we fix that? Well, this is an indicator to me that some of these materials are probably linked together as references. And I'll tell you what I'm going to do is I'm going to do Command Z to undo these color changes. Now, it will take a few of those Command Z's to undo it, but the illuminance is gone. It's back down to 1. And I'm scrolling back up to this material here. And if I right click on this, I'm going to click Detach Reference. Now, if I go into this material and I scroll back down and I apply that illuminance again, I'm just going to bump it on up to some random number. And let's go back to that red. Boom. Now we have that illuminance getting applied to only this building and no other buildings. That's perfect. But then if we look a little bit deeper, check this out. If I move my mouse just right, check that out. We have another part highlighted right there. That's what I actually want to light up. So I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to undo this yet again because I didn't even notice that we could actually select just that little part, and that's what we actually want to light up. So let me Command Z a few more times. And now let's see if we can select it. Boom. Those 4 lights right there, that's what I really want, and it's the light signs. So I'm going to right click on this, and I'm going to go ahead and detach that reference because maybe I want to light up other lights on other buildings, different colors. So detaching that reference, I'm only going to change those 4 lights right there. And I know I'm selecting all sorts of different things. Going to scroll on down to that material. It looks like we have a KITBASH material on it, but I just want to see if we can light this up real quick. So bump the illuminance on up and let's change that color to a red. Now it doesn't necessarily look red right now, but as you can see, we are definitely lighting up just those 4 parts of that light post. And switching the camera over to the diamond, we can see a little bit more of a red there, but feel free to, fine tune, adjust that to your liking. And yeah, there you have it. Importing several buildings as one OBJ file, grouping those buildings together, adjusting the scale so that it is lifelike. And then we took a little sneak peek at, diving into one of these buildings, exploring some of the materials, detaching some references so that we only change the material on each particular building itself. And in future videos, we will look into creating a scene, something like you saw in the intro video, plus a few more things as well. If you have any questions, leave a comment below. And that's it for this video. I hope it helped.